Ethan, a 32-year-old man living independently at Boston, Massachusetts, always felt like a shadow in the family. He grew up with his younger sister Isabella, someone for whom all the family spotlight seemed to belong. While Ethan is a hard worker, building a life through his own labor, Isabella is cherished and pampered by her family like a princess. That made Ethan jealous and bitter, but he never really expressed his feelings. Christmas evening at Greenwood Estate, his family's house, is always a special occasion, but it's also when Ethan's feelings of being forgotten are strongest. This year is no exception. Ethan walked into the cozy house with twinkling lights and the familiar scent of cinnamon cookies and roast turkey. He brought a bottle of wine and homemade apple pie, like every year. But unlike Ethan, Isabella appeared with a gorgeous appearance, immediately attracting the attention of everyone in the living room. As the family gathered around the dinner table, Ethan tried to soak up the festive atmosphere, but couldn't help but notice the proud eyes of his parents looking at Isabella. The climax was when his mother, Margaret, smiled brightly and turned her gaze towards his sister. "Isabella, honey, tell everyone about your business plan," she said, her voice filled with pride. Ethan couldn't help but be surprised when he heard Isabella enthusiastically present her plan to open a fashion store. He was so surprised that he dropped his fork. "Isabella, business? My sister, who hasn't worked a day since graduating," Ethan thought to himself, trying to stay calm. But before he could say anything, the whole family cheered, praising Isabella as a business genius. The look in his parents' eyes, a familiar look that Ethan had seen all his life, made his heart clench. That was the look always given to Isabella, along with his mother's sweet words. "Ethan, will you help your sister? You have that savings." Those words were like a knife cutting into Ethan's self-esteem. Why is it always me? He wondered, a bitter feeling filling his heart as the family continued to celebrate Isabella's vague plan. Ethan sat quietly in his office, looking at his phone screen with a text message from Isabella. His sister had just sent him a long list of necessary funds for her business plan. Total, $35,000, almost all the money Ethan had saved over the past 5 years to buy his own dream apartment. The numbers flashing on the screen made him feel choked up. Why do I have to do this? Why is it always me who sacrifices? Ethan wondered, but the answer was already in his mother's expectant eyes and the cheers from his family on Christmas Eve. Surrounded by pressure, memories of times when his family put Isabella's needs above his come clearly to mind. From a young age, Ethan was used to being ignored. The time he needed new shoes to run on the high school team, but his parents said they didn't have enough money, only to buy a new iPhone for Isabella a few days later because she was sad. Or the time he wanted to learn piano but was rejected because it was expensive, while Isabella was sent to take horseback riding lessons at an expensive club. Ethan wanted to refuse, wanted to scream that he had had enough. But mother's eyes and words, "Help me, it just needs a start," rang in his head like an inevitable imposition. Finally, after many sleepless nights, he decided to transfer the money. Maybe this time will be different, Ethan told himself, trying to find some hope that Isabella would truly change, that she would take advantage of this opportunity to grow up and prove herself worthy of her family's trust. As soon as the money was transferred, Isabella immediately texted back, "Thank you, Ethan. I promise I won't disappoint you." Those words made Ethan smile faintly, but in his heart there was still insecurity. He reminded himself that this wasn't just about savings. That was his dream of an apartment, the sacrifice he had quietly endured for many years. Hopefully she will be really different this time, Ethan thought, trying to dispel the anxiety in his heart. But that feeling still lingered, like an unnamed warning, that he had just bet everything on someone he wasn't sure could change. In the first weeks after transferring money, Ethan tried to focus on work, trying to forget the anxiety about his decision. But the insecurity kept creeping in. Every night, when he returned to his small rented apartment, he wondered if Isabella really used that money for business, or just repeated a series of familiar mistakes. Calls from his mother made him even more suspicious. She always talked about Isabella's brilliant future, but never once mentioned the actual progress of the store. One Sunday night at family dinner, Ethan couldn't help but ask, "Isabella, "Have you found a place to open a store yet? When can you come and see?" Isabella paused a bit but quickly answered with confidence. "Sure, I'm getting everything sorted out. Can you come next week?" Her answer sounded reasonable, but her averted eyes made Ethan more suspicious. That night, in the quiet room, Ethan decided to check Isabella's social media accounts. He scrolled through each post and felt choked up when he saw photos of his sister, posing in front of the Eiffel Tower, sipping coffee in Rome, shopping in Milan, and relaxing on a beach in Santorini. Each photo is brilliant, but they don't resemble the journey of a young entrepreneur setting up shop. "Where does she get the money to do these things?" Ethan whispered, feeling anger and frustration welling up. The next morning, Ethan confronts Isabella over the phone. "Isabella, I want to know what's going on. Why are you traveling around instead of focusing on the store?" Isabella, in a carefree tone, replied, "Don't worry, it's all in the plan. I met a supplier in Europe. The quality is much better than Chinese products. Trust me." But that answer only made Ethan angrier. "Plan? I'd rather use your money to go out." Feeling that Isabella cannot be trusted, Ethan decides to take action. He came Beacon Hill Investigations, hired a private investigator to investigate how Isabella had used the money. Sitting in the detective office, he only had one request. "I need to know exactly where that money went. Every transaction, every trip, everything." The days waiting for the results were the longest days of Ethan's life. Every ring of the phone made him so nervous that he couldn't breathe. He didn't know what he would find, but deep down, he knew that his suspicions were well-founded. "She hasn't changed. I was hoping for too much," he thought, a feeling of bitterness filling him as he looked back at his sacrifice. 3 weeks after hiring the detective, Ethan received a call from the office Beacon Hill Investigations. Sitting in Detective David Chen's small room, he felt like his heart was about to stop beating. On the table was a thick file, and David did not hesitate to start with a sharp statement. "Miss Isabella never intended to open a store, and here is proof of that." David began presenting each document. $20,000 was spent on cosmetic surgery procedures, including nose jobs and lip fillers, he said, pushing the hospital bill towards Ethan. Another $15,000 is for international travel, including airfare, hotels, and high-end restaurants in Europe. And the remaining amount? Shop for branded goods from handbags to shoes. Ethan was speechless. He looked at every invoice, every bank statement, and every travel itinerary printed clearly in front of him. "What about the store?" "She said she rented the store and bought clothes," Ethan asked, his voice hoarse with anger. David pulled out a rental contract and placed it in front of him. "This is the lease contract for the place she once showed you about. That store was only rented for 1 day, the day she took him to see it. All clothes in the store are rented and can be returned the next day." Those words were like a knife cutting into Ethan's self-esteem. The deception did not stop at Isabella, but also extended to his family, who blindly supported her. "She played with my trust, with my entire family," Ethan thought, a feeling of anger mixed with bitterness rising. Leaving the office, Ethan took the file back to his apartment. All night long, he sat staring at the evidence before him, feeling mixed feelings of disappointment and pain. The memories of when he tried to trust Isabella, when he hoped that she would change, were now nothing but emptiness. "I sacrificed my dream for this," Ethan muttered, tears forming in his tired eyes. But the pain gradually turned into determination. He knew he couldn't let Isabella continue to deceive him, not only for his sake, but also for his own justice. "She will be responsible," Ethan silently promised, the feeling of anger now turning into a resilient fire. That night, Ethan began to make plans. He knew facing Isabella and her family wouldn't be easy, but this time, he no longer kept silent. "It's time to reveal the truth," Ethan thought, a heavy file in his hand, filled with determination and readiness for the upcoming battle. Ethan walked into his parents' house on Thursday afternoon, when the family was gathering for tea as usual. The atmosphere is familiar, the sound of laughter and chatter is heard, the smell of just-baked cookies spreads in the space. But this time, Ethan didn't feel the usual warmth. In his hand was a thick file, evidence of Isabella's deception. He felt every eye turn to look at him as he entered the living room. "Isabella, when are you going to repay the $50,000 you borrowed from me?" The question rang out like a thunderclap, cutting through the noise in the room. Everyone was silent, and Isabella, sitting at the center of attention as usual, looked up with her familiar smile. "Ethan, I know you can't pay right away. All the money is being invested in the store. You need to be patient." Ethan smirked, but not because he was happy. He placed the file on the coffee table, pulled out each document, and placed them in front of everyone. "Investment? This is the bill for my cosmetic surgery. Here's the plane ticket, the hotel bill in Europe, and here's the store lease, just for one day. The store you showed off to your family is just a fake." The room seemed to explode. Ethan's parents, especially his mother, immediately spoke up to defend Isabella. "Ethan, your sister is trying to build a career. How can you doubt it like that?" His mother raised her voice, but Ethan did not flinch. "Try? She spent all my money on luxuries, not any business." Isabella began to cry, her familiar sobs causing her parents to rush to comfort her. But this time, Ethan did not give in. "Crying won't change the truth, Isabella. And this time, people won't be able to hide the truth. I hired detectives, and they're all here." The living room was in chaos, but Ethan stood there, steadfast. He is no longer the older brother who always sacrifices himself to keep peace. "If no one wants to accept the truth, I will let the court decide," he said before leaving the house, leaving behind heavy silence and shocked looks from everyone. This time, he knew he had to protect himself. The legal battle begins with all the tension and complications that Ethan predicted. Standing in court, he faced not only Isabella, but also his parents, who tirelessly defended his sister. "She just needs more time," his mother said in her testimony, her voice sweet but full of hints. Ethan misunderstood her. He is a promising young businessman. His father, with a serious look, added, "Ethan always had problems with Isabella. This isn't about money, it's about jealousy." Ethan stood still, his heart clenching. Their words not only denied the truth, but also made him feel like a traitor to his family. But this time, he did not back down. In his hand was irrefutable evidence: plastic surgery bills, travel schedules, hotel bills, and even a store rental contract for just one day. When Detective David Chen was called as a witness, he detailed each of Isabella's transactions, leaving the courtroom in suffocating silence. The fatal blow came from the testimony of the store owner, Mr. Rodriguez. "She only rented the space for one day," he said, his voice calm. "She said it was a joke to the family. Clothes are also rented and returned immediately." Ethan looked at Isabella, expecting a rebuttal, but she just bowed her head, staring intently at her polished nails. This time, her tears were no longer effective. When the judge read the verdict, her voice was firm but decisive. Based on the evidence presented, the court finds that the defendant, Isabella Walker, committed intentional fraud. She was forced to repay $50,000 to the plaintiff, along with $20,000 in compensation for mental damages and investigation costs. Ethan breathed a sigh of relief, but that joy was not entirely complete. He looked at his parents, hoping to find some remorse or understanding in their eyes, but all there was disappointment. "You really destroyed this family," his mother said as she left the court, not forgetting to turn around and give him a reproachful look. Isabella, now with no way to escape, walked past him without a word. The compensation amount was transferred to Ethan's account just a few days later. His parents, having no other choice, had to borrow money to help Isabella pay off her debt. Ethan held the money in his hand, but did not feel victorious. Dreams of the ideal apartment have had to be scaled back, as legal and investigation costs have eaten up most of the compensation. However, when he stood in his new apartment, small but completely his, Ethan felt serenity. "I have protected my own justice," he thought, watching the sunset shine through the window. Outside, the world continues, but for Ethan, this is a new beginning, no longer burdened with injustice and blind sacrifice. After the trial ended, Ethan officially entered a new life, but not without heavy consequences from the incident. Family, once the place where he sought warmth and love, now became a source of reproaches and shunned eyes. The calls from his mother became rare, but every time she called, her voice was always full of anger and bitterness. "You destroyed this family, Ethan. How can you sue your own sister?" Relatives like Aunt Martha and Uncle Bob, who had always spoken up to protect Isabella, now openly avoided Ethan. They called him a family traitor who chose money over love. A few common family friends also gradually distanced themselves, as if Ethan carried a stain that could not be washed away. Even on social networks, Isabella continues to play the victim, posting emotional posts about being hurt by her own family members. That made Ethan feel even more lonely. Still, Ethan has no regrets. He knew the decision to sue Isabella was the right one. Every day, when he stood in the small apartment that completely belonged to him, he felt a sense of freedom that he had never felt before. No more pressure to sacrifice for family, no more feeling of having to hide pain to maintain fake peace. That apartment, although not large, is the result of his own resilience and self-esteem. Ethan begins to rebuild his life. He reconnected with real friends who didn't judge him simply for the decisions he made. He spends time at work, investing in projects that he is truly passionate about. Every day he feels he is getting closer to a life he deserves, no longer dependent on the approval of others, especially his family. The biggest lesson Ethan learned from it all was the value of self-respect and fairness. Sometimes, family is not the people who really understand and appreciate you, he thought. And to live a true life, sometimes you have to put yourself first. With that in mind, Ethan entered a new phase of life, with no resentment, no regrets, but only gratitude that he had finally found the strength to protect himself.